I was sitting in a hard chair, my hands resting on my knees, while a man I had never seen before leafed through papers on the table. He didn't look at me. He spoke as if I weren't there. He said that from that moment on, I could no longer decide anything on my own. Not about my money, not about my house, not about my own life. The strangest thing is that nobody asked me anything. My grandson was beside him, serious, silent, as if it were just a bureaucratic detail. I tried to speak. My voice came out weak. They said it was better for me to rest, that all of this was for my own good. But something was wrong, very wrong. And to understand how I ended up in that room, being treated as someone incapable without ever having been heard, I need to go back to the beginning. If you follow true stories like this, subscribe now. Now let me tell you how it all began. For most of my life, I was a simple but responsible man. I worked from a young age, built a modest house, paid every bill on time, and raised my children with what I had. I was never rich, but I also never needed to ask for help. When my wife died, many years after we started our family, the house became too big for the silence. I still managed well, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of the yard. The problem didn't start all at once. It crept in gradually, almost politely. My grandson became more present in my life after he lost his job. At first, he seemed just concerned. He would ask if I was okay, if I had eaten, if I hadn't forgotten to take my medication. I thought it was sweet. I told myself it was lucky to have someone young around. He started spending more time at my house. He slept in the back room. He said it was temporary. I saw no reason to be suspicious. After all, he was my grandson. Over time, he started taking care of small things. He paid bills online because he said I could make mistakes. He organized my documents to make things easier. He kept cards and passwords in a folder, explaining that it was safer that way. Always with a calm, patient, almost protective tone. I began to notice that I spoke less, made fewer decisions. When I mentioned something different, he smiled and said I was confused, that it was normal at my age. Visits dwindled, friends stopped showing up. When someone called, he'd say I was sleeping. When I asked why no one came anymore, he'd say people had their own lives. Little by little, my world became smaller. The house was the same, but it seemed to shrink. I couldn't explain the discomfort. I just felt it. There were days when I wanted to go to the bank. He said I didn't need to, that he had already taken care of everything. Other times, I wanted to go for a walk alone. He insisted on going with me or said it wasn't safe. I started hearing phrases like, "It's better this way," and "Trust me," always for me, never with me. My body changed too. I became quieter, more tired. Sometimes I forgot simple words. He used that as proof that I wasn't okay. I listened, but something inside me resisted. I knew who I was. I knew what I had lived through. I knew I still understood things. But every time I tried to assert that, I was treated as stubborn. The first time I felt truly mistreated wasn't with a shout or a shove. It was when I asked to see a document and he refused. He said I didn't need to worry about it, that it was something a responsible adult would handle. That hurt more than any physical aggression. I've always been the responsible adult. Meals became irregular. Sometimes there was no fresh food. He said I wasn't really eating. Other times I would be alone for hours, not knowing where he was. When I asked, the answer was always the same. I already asked that before. I began to doubt my own memory. There wasn't one clear moment when everything fell apart. It was a sequence of small losses, a right here, a decision there. Until one day, without understanding how, I was sitting in that hard chair while strangers decided my future. I didn't know what detail was still missing for everything to make sense, but it existed, and that was what I still didn't know. After that day in the cold room, I returned home with a feeling that wouldn't leave me. It wasn't pure fear. It was something deeper, as if I had been pushed out of my own life without realizing when it started. My grandson drove in silence. He didn't explain anything. When I asked what those papers meant, he said I was too tired to understand, that we would talk later. That later never came. In the following days, I noticed subtle but decisive changes. My documents were no longer where I used to keep them. The blue folder had disappeared. When I asked, he replied impatiently, saying that I always forgot where I put things. He claimed he had stored everything in a safe place. He didn't say where. I felt ashamed to ask again. The landline started to be disconnected. He said nobody used it anymore, that it was just a scam. My old cell phone disappeared too. In its place, a new device appeared that I didn't know how to use. Calls would come in, but he would answer before I could. He said it was spam. I started going days without talking to anyone but him. The meals kept getting worse. Sometimes there was too much food, sometimes almost none. When I complained, he said I didn't remember what I'd eaten. On certain nights, I went to bed hungry, but ashamed to insist. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. I didn't want to confirm the fragile image he painted of me for others. There was an incident that still causes me a pang in my chest. An old neighbor appeared at the gate. I heard his voice and tried to go out and talk to him. My grandson stood in front of the door and said I was sick, that I couldn't receive visitors. I protested, but he closed the gate from the inside. He said he was protecting me. I stood there in the living room, listening to the muffled conversation outside, like someone listening to their own life being recounted without being able to correct anything. I started to suspect what was happening with my money. I wasn't seeing any more bank statements. I didn't know how much was coming in or how much was going out. When I asked, he replied that it made me anxious. That anxiety was bad for older people. I felt infantilized, as if my entire experience had been erased. My body reacted to all of that. I started sleeping poorly. I would wake up confused with the feeling of always being indebted to someone. My hands trembled more. He pointed this out as proof that I was getting worse. "See," he would say, "you don't realize it, but I do." The doctor's visits became strange. He answered for me. He corrected my words. When I said I was fine in some aspect, he disagreed. When I complained about something, he downplayed it. I felt that my version of events didn't matter. I left the appointments feeling more insecure than when I went in. At home, I started hearing hushed conversations on the phone. Whenever I approached, he would change the subject. At night, I heard arguments behind the bedroom door. My name was mentioned, but when I asked, they said it was all in my head. I began to doubt my perception, and that was perhaps the cruelest part. One day, I needed money to buy something simple. He said he couldn't, that the budget was tight. It didn't make sense. I had never lived like that. I had never needed to ask to buy the basics. That's when I felt, for the first time, a silent anger mixed with fear. Something was being taken from me, piece by piece. I tried to write down everything I remembered in a notebook, approximate dates, phrases I heard, changes I noticed. I hid the notebook in an old drawer. It was my way of proving to myself that I still thought, still remembered, still existed. A few days later, the notebook disappeared. He said I must have lost it. He smiled as he spoke. The isolation was almost total. I didn't go out alone. I didn't make any decisions. I didn't know what was being done in my name. I felt ashamed to ask for help because I wasn't sure if anyone would believe me. After all, he seemed so dedicated, so caring. Who would believe the confused old man? It was during this period that I began to notice a small, almost invisible, but persistent detail. A detail that didn't fit with the discourse of care. Something that, if observed carefully, dismantled that entire narrative of protection. At the time, I didn't yet understand the weight of it. But it was there that the truth began to reveal itself. The detail began to repeat itself in different ways, always too small to be singled out, but too constant to be ignored. First, it was a letter that never reached me. I recognized the envelope's logo even before it was placed on the table. It was from the bank. My grandson quickly grabbed the letter and put it away without opening it in front of me. He said it was advertising. I knew it wasn't. A few days later, I heard the sound of the ATM on the street as he left the house. It wasn't usual. He always said he handled everything through the app. When he returned, he was more tense. He spoke little. He avoided looking at me. I asked if everything was all right. He replied that I had already asked that 3 times. I was sure it wasn't. I started observing more, paying attention to schedules, phrases, habits. I began pretending to be more confused than I actually felt. It was an instinctive, almost shameful but necessary strategy. The less of a threat I represented, the more he relaxed. And when he relaxed, he made small mistakes. One of these oversights happened on an ordinary morning. He left his wallet on the table while he went to the bathroom. He never did that. My heart raced. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I felt I needed to look. I opened it slowly. I saw cards I didn't recognize. One had my name on it, another didn't. I mentally noted the numbers I could remember before putting everything back in its place. The feeling was strange. It wasn't relief. It was confirmation. Something was being done with my money outside of my control, using my name. This wasn't care. It was misappropriation. But something concrete was still missing. Something that could be shown, proven, explained, without sounding like the ravings of an old man. That same week, a charge appeared on my cable TV bill. An expensive package, one I never would have asked for. When I questioned it, he said it was so I would have more entertainment options. I hardly ever watched television. When I suggested cancelling, he got angry. He said I didn't know what was best for me. It was the first time he raised his voice. After that, the subtle nudges began. Not strong, but enough to make me lose my balance, always accompanied by quick excuses. It was an accident. You moved, suddenly. My body began to register marks I didn't remember making. He said I fell on my own. I started walking with excessive caution, afraid of confirming his version. One night, I woke up hungry. I went to the kitchen and found the refrigerator almost empty. There were recent receipts on the table, large purchases, food I hadn't seen. I put one of the receipts in my pajama pocket. The next day, it was gone. He said I must have thrown it away without understanding. The medical appointments became crucial. A new professional was recommended. My grandson seemed pleased. During the appointment, the doctor spoke about autonomy, about limits. My grandson interrupted several times. He said I forgot important things, that I had left the stove on, that I needed constant supervision. I tried to disagree. The doctor looked at himself, not at me. It was on that day that I heard the word that changed everything. Incapacity. It wasn't said directly, but it was implied in every sentence. I felt like they were preparing me for something bigger, something definitive, and I wasn't part of the decision. When I got home, I found my bedroom door locked. It had never happened before. He said it was for security reasons, that I could hurt myself going through my things. That devastated me. My memories, my belongings, my history were all there. Locked away, out of my reach. I started sleeping very little. My mind was working non-stop. I tried to connect the dots. The money management, the isolation, the appointments, the missing documents. Everything led to a conclusion I avoided accepting. He wasn't helping me live better. He was preparing to live without me. The detail I had been observing finally took shape one quiet afternoon. He left in a hurry and forgot something on the table. It wasn't a complete document. It was just a partial copy. But there was my name, my signature, and a date I didn't remember. My heart raced. This shouldn't exist. I still didn't understand everything, but now I was sure of one thing. That piece of paper was the key. And someone had signed something for me that I would never have authorized. From that moment on, I knew it wasn't just abandonment. It was abuse. And the truth was closer than ever. The paper stayed in my head for the rest of the day. I pretended to sleep in the armchair while replaying every detail I had seen. My full name, a document number, a crooked signature similar to mine but not exactly the same. The date was recent. I was sure I hadn't signed anything during that period. I didn't even leave the house alone anymore. It didn't make sense, and that's precisely why it mattered so much. When he returned, I maintained the most neutral expression I could muster. I couldn't show that I had seen anything. I had learned, in that forced coexistence, that any sign of distrust was used against me, so I remained silent. I agreed with everything. I thanked him. I apologized for things I hadn't done. It was humiliating but necessary. I started paying attention to his behavior after that day. He was more secure, more confident. He began talking about future changes, always in the plural, never with me. Let's organize this better. Let's see what's best. He never asked what I wanted. It was as if my wishes had been officially dismissed. The restrictions increased. He started locking the gate even during the day. He said it was for my protection. The keys were kept out of my reach. When I questioned him, he replied impatiently, saying I could get lost in the street. I had never been lost, but I began to believe that perhaps it was possible. Constant repetition breeds doubt, even in the most steadfast mind. There was a day when I felt a sharp pain in my arm. I asked to go to the doctor. He postponed it. He said it was nothing, that I complained too much. I was in pain for 2 days until he finally decided to take me. On the way, he asked me not to exaggerate, to only speak about what was essential. That left me silent for the entire consultation. I also noticed that he started commenting to other people, always near me, that I was getting worse. He spoke as if he were sacrificing himself, as if he were carrying a heavy burden. People praised him. They said I was lucky. I smiled, but inside I felt something breaking. I started thinking of ways to record what was happening. I couldn't write. He searched my things, so I started memorizing. Approximate dates, exact phrases, changes in tone. It was tiring, but it gave me some control. It was my last form of resistance. One afternoon I overheard him talking on the phone about selling. I didn't hear everything, just snippets, appraisal, documents, deadline. My stomach churned. The house, where I had lived for decades, wasn't just a material possession. It was my history, and it was being treated as something negotiable without my presence. That night, I tried to confront him. Carefully, I asked if something was being decided without me. He laughed, a short, cold laugh. He said I was imagining things, that I needed more rest. Then he said I'd forgotten to take my medication even though I knew I had. That constant inversion of reality confused me for a few minutes. And he noticed. It was there that I understood how calculated it all was. It wasn't impulse, it wasn't disorganization. It was method, mental exhaustion, doubt, dependence. All of that creates silence, and silence protects the abuser. The following days were marked by small punishments. If I questioned something, I was left alone longer. If I insisted, he became more abrupt. I learned to measure every word, to anticipate his mood. My life began to revolve around that. A seemingly simple event changed the course of things. A technician showed up to check something at the house. I didn't know why. During the visit, the technician spoke directly to me. He asked if I was the owner. I said yes. My grandson quickly interrupted, saying I was confused. The technician looked at me for a few seconds. He didn't say anything, but that look stayed with me. After the coach left, my grandson became aggressive. He said I had embarrassed myself, that I was a nuisance. It was the first time he grabbed my arm forcefully. It didn't leave a visible mark, but it caused pain. More than that, he made it clear that I shouldn't talk. That night, I barely slept. I thought about running away, but where to? I had no phone, I had no money, I had no one. The isolation was almost complete. That's when I understood that the biggest prison wasn't the house. It was the dependency created little by little. The next day, he left early. He said he had something important to take care of. He locked the house. I was alone for hours. I walked through the house in silence. I observed every corner. In a forgotten drawer, I found something that shouldn't be there. An envelope with copies. Not complete, but enough. My name, my assets, my life being reorganized without me. I held that envelope with trembling hands. It was no longer a doubt. It wasn't a feeling. It was a fact. And now I needed to decide whether I would continue surviving in silence or do something even without knowing how. From that point on, there was no turning back. I didn't sleep that night. The envelope remained hidden under the mattress, heavy as if it contained concrete. It wasn't just papers, it was decisions made without me, using my name as if it were a disposable formality. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, trying to understand at what point my life had ceased to be mine. There wasn't a specific day. It was an accumulation of concessions made out of exhaustion, trust, and fear of being alone. The next morning, my grandson returned different. Calmer, excessively kind. He made coffee, asked if I had slept well. This kind of change always came after something important to him. That put me on alert. I didn't answer much. I observed. He mentioned that perhaps it would be good for me to rest for a while. Said that I needed specialized care. He spoke as if suggesting a trip. I understood it as a warning. When I asked about the documents, he didn't change his tune. He said I must have seen something old, that he didn't understand it properly, that these things were complicated. Then he commented that the doctor agreed I wasn't in a condition to decide. He always used third parties as a shield. He never took direct responsibility for anything. I spent the whole day rehearsing a decision that terrified me. I needed to talk to someone on the outside, someone who wasn't under his influence. But how? I didn't have a phone. I didn't have money. I didn't even have access to the gate. That's when I remembered the coach, his look. It hadn't been my imagination. Someone had noticed. Late in the afternoon, I heard the gate open. My grandson wasn't home. It was the same old neighbor I hadn't seen in months. He was talking loudly outside, calling my name. For the first time in a long time, someone came up to me without asking permission. My heart raced. I ran to the window and waved discreetly. He found my behavior strange. He asked if everything was all right. I hesitated. The fear of speaking was enormous. But the fear of remaining silent was greater. I only said that I needed help, that something was wrong. I didn't go into details. I asked him to come back the next day with someone he trusted. He nodded, serious. When my grandson returned and learned of the visit, he was furious. He said I was putting things in people's heads, that it was only making my situation worse. For the first time, he spoke clearly about taking me away from there. He said I was no longer able to live alone. That confirmed everything. That night, I hid the envelope inside the pillowcase. I slept little, but I went to sleep with a decision made. If something happened to me, those papers needed to be found. It was my last guarantee. The next day, the neighbor returned accompanied by another person. I won't mention who. I'll only say that it was someone who knew how to listen. My grandson tried to stop the conversation. He said I was confused, but I spoke slowly, without exaggeration. I recounted facts. I showed the documents. I didn't need to convince anyone. The pieces fell into place on their own. The following hours were confusing. There were arguments, phone calls, people coming and going. My grandson changed his tone several times. First indignation, then victimhood, finally silence. He realized he was no longer in control of the narrative. That disarmed him. I was taken to another place temporarily, a simple place, but where no one spoke for me. I underwent evaluations. I was listened to. For the first time in a long time, someone asked me what I wanted. I cried when I answered, not out of weakness, but out of relief. It turned out that much had been done without my consent. Some things were reversible, others were not. Some of the money had been moved, documents had been signed. None of this happened overnight. It was a slow, silent process built on trust and isolation. My grandson stopped showing up. I heard he told everyone he'd done everything out of love. Maybe he believed it. Many abusers don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as stewards of what they believe belongs to them. I was left with marks that don't show up on tests. Mistrust. Fear of dependence, guilt for not realizing it sooner. But I was also left with something I thought I had lost. My voice. Today, I understand that elder abuse rarely begins with violence. It begins with too much help, with decisions made for their own good, with the slow erosion of their autonomy. Before we know it, we're sitting in a hard chair, listening to strangers decide our lives. This story doesn't end with perfect justice. It ends with awareness. With the recognition that this happens every day, in ordinary homes, with ordinary families, and that silence is the greatest ally of those who hurt others. The place where I was taken in wasn't anything special. A simple room, light-colored walls, a firm bed. But there was something there that I hadn't felt in a long time. Fearless silence. Nobody locked doors. Nobody answered for me. When I spoke, someone listened until the end. It may seem like little, but after so long being treated like a problem, that was everything. The following days were about adjustments. I had to repeat my story several times. Each repetition hurt less and clarified more. I realized I wasn't alone. Other people had gone through similar situations. Some worse. The pattern was always the same: isolation, control, emotional exhaustion, slow appropriation. The abuse didn't come with shouting at first. It came with soft phrases. I underwent medical and psychological evaluations. None of them confirmed the disability they had portrayed. There were, however, signs of stress, anxiety, and confusion caused by constant pressure. Nothing irreversible. When I heard this, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief at not being lost, sadness at realizing how much they had tried to convince me otherwise. The house remained empty for a while. Legal proceedings were initiated. Some decisions could be reviewed, others could not. Part of what was lost did not return, and that's important to say. Not every story ends with everything resolved. Real life doesn't work that way. What often returns is only dignity. My grandson didn't contact me, maybe out of shame, maybe out of anger, maybe out of fear. I don't know. What I do know is that, for a long time, I wondered where I had gone wrong. If I had been too naive. If I had created the wrong expectations. It took me a while to understand that trusting your own family isn't a mistake. The mistake is normalizing abuse when it comes disguised as care. Today, my routine is simple. I make my own choices, small ones, but mine nonetheless. I've started talking to people again, walking when I want to, deciding what to eat, when to sleep, where to go. Things that seemed trivial, but that had been taken from me without me realizing it. There are still difficult nights. I still wake up feeling like I need to ask permission. I still find myself justifying decisions that don't need explaining. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but it also leaves warning signs. Now I know how to recognize them. I know that too much help can hide control. I know that imposed silence is not protection. I tell this story not to expose anyone, but to show something that many people prefer to ignore. Elder abuse doesn't only happen in remote places or in problematic families. It happens in ordinary homes, with ordinary people, with seemingly reasonable justifications. If you're hearing this and something sounds familiar, don't ignore it. If you know someone who has been isolated, who has stopped making decisions about their own life, who has stopped speaking, observe, ask, listen. Sometimes, all that's missing is someone willing to listen without judgment. Reporting abuse isn't betraying your family, it's protecting those who have already given everything they could. Abuse thrives in silence, doubt, and shame, and it diminishes when someone says, "This isn't right." If you've made it this far, like this video, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening from. Stories like this need to circulate to reach those who haven't yet been able to speak up. If you live in the United States and suspect elder abuse, seek help. The Elder Care Locator can be reached at 1-800-677-1116. For cases of financial fraud, there is the National Elder Fraud Hotline at 1-833-372-831. In situations of immediate danger, call 911. No one should grow old in fear. No one should lose their voice within their own home. If this story has opened your eyes, then it has fulfilled its purpose, because what often saves lives is not perfect justice. It is shared awareness.